The 70s are over. The new decade demands a new person, and you are that person. Coast to coast, LA to Chicago, you are a smooth operator. You mean business. Hell, you are business. And there are only three things on your mind. Time, because time is money. Money, because money is money. And nicotine. Nicotine to fuel your pursuit of money. Business people of the 1980s, I present a device tailor-made to meet all your needs. A clock, an alarm, calendar, calculator, and lighter, all in one sleek package. The Casio QL-10. Look, Casio was and still is a company that makes a bunch of different things. Casio always had a weird streak, especially back in the days of the consumer electronics boom. If Casio could think of a feature to add to a calculator, they absolutely would. They had a fortune-telling version, more than one that will let you play beep-boop music, one that lets you monitor your biorhythms. I mean, look at these two. They monitored their biorhythm cycles using the Casio Biolator electronic calculator, and just look at how serene they are. Don't you want to be like them? Anyway, the point is that Casio would make some wild swings at potential markets, and they wanted to make sure you knew even their calculators could do more than just crunch numbers. The QL-10 was part of that approach. Alright, I know the lighter aspect still seems weird, and it is weird when viewed from 2024, but if you look at it in context, specifically Casio's domestic market of Japan in the 1980s, it makes more sense. Because back when this product came out, about 45% of Japan's population smoked. Having a lighter on you at all times was nearly required. Plus, I think that the QL-10 Calculighter was something of an homage, intentional or not, to the company's original breakout hit product. This. Yes, that's a ring-mounted cigarette holder called a UB-Watt pipe. It allowed people to smoke cigarettes down to the absolute end while keeping their hands free. It was invented by the company's co-founder, Toshio Casio, in 1946, and its sales directly financed the development of Casio's calculator business, which eventually gave us this. Let's dive into it. The first thing you'll notice when handling the QL-10 is that it feels surprisingly small. I do have large hands, but even so, its front measures about 4 inches by 2 inches and it is only about half an inch thick. One of its edges is rounded to feel more comfortable in the hand. Its surface feels like a chromed plastic and its shiny nature was a pain in filming throughout. Sorry about that. On the side is a fairly heavy flame trigger along with a lock button. That button prevents you from accidentally activating the lighter while it's in your pocket. It's a nice built-in safety feature. The lighter fill valve and integrated flame height adjuster on the bottom, as is the battery compartment covered by the sliding lid you see on the right. Strictly speaking, this is a simple 4-function calculator. Its small size means the buttons will be very small as well, but they do the job just fine. Once you look beyond the calculator functions, and yes, the lighter, you see there's more to it. The row of buttons above the standard calculator keys includes various setting options, including displaying the time and date on the device. Actually, it can also display more than one time zone. I just couldn't figure out how. You can see a day indicator on the lower edge of the screen bezel. The upper edge of the bezel shows that the device is capable of storing 2 alarms and can function as a timer. In fact, I'm going to demo the countdown timer. I set it for 1 minute, and this is what it sounds like. One of the QL-10's more obscure functions is the ability to do math on times and dates, aka sexagesimal calculations. For example, if I enter September 28th, 2039 and add 150 days to it, I get the answer of February 25th, 2040. Or if I want to know how many days there are between, say, March 29th, 2026 and June 1st, 2024. Alright, let's just move on. If I'm to truly demystify this thing, then I'll need to show you its guts. Okay, no, I'm not crazy. These are rare and expensive. I actually have 2, only one of which works. That's the one I'll disassemble. Before I do, I'll show you the battery compartment. It takes two G13 cells, which are equivalent to today's AG13, LR44, and a few others. The battery compartment is held in the device by one small Phillips screw. Once the screw is removed, the actual calculator part of the device can be removed as well. Admittedly, I've opened this one a bunch of times, so it's extra easy at this point. We'll look at the lighter section first. The brass section stores butane, connected to the business end of the lighter with a tube. It is stamped with a date of December 20th, 1978, or 9. Most online resources about the QL-10 put its origins in the mid-80s, and I think this shows that the device is likely older than that. The black section is the piezoelectric element that creates a spark to light the butane. And even though the calculator is not functional, the light part very much is. In short, this thing is dead due to a common affliction. The owner left batteries inside it, allowing them to corrode and leak over time. You can see the worst of it on the bottom of the PCB in this shot. Disassembling the calculator is fairly straightforward. The round black part is the most rudimentary of speakers, which explains why the alarm sounds the way it does. The rest of the interior is actually typical of the era. A single NEC chip to crunch the numbers, the keyboard that uses a rubber membrane that was common at the time as well, and the 8-digit LCD, most likely used across the Casio product line. And just for a complete view, here's one of the tiny keys. So there we are, from this to this. But I want to do more with it. In my opinion, something as weird and rare as this needs both a protective case and a display box. After taking a few measurements of the device, I cut out a leather stiffener material that would give the case some extra body. I glued the stiffener to the backside of the leather using water-based adhesive. With that out of the way, I created a pattern for the pieces that will securely hold this precious cargo inside this case. Paper is commonly used for making leather patterns. I thinned down the leather using a razor skiver. This helps it bend and fold more easily, allowing it to create a cradle for the calculator. Once thinned down, the backside of the leather is quite fuzzy. I finished it using a burnishing agent and a glass burnisher. I then used a pattern to cut out the final pieces and make sure they fit. Thankfully, the top of the calculator just needs a simple strap. I used an edge beveler to knock down the sharp corners, which I burnished off camera. The case itself is going to be lined in black microsuede. The pieces that will hold the calculator will partially go through the microsuede to be sandwiched between the lining and the leather back. It was a fairly simple yet fiddly job. My voiceover explanation didn't make sense to you, here you can see what I meant. The next step was to attach the hold-down strap and cradle to the lining. Leatherwork is very much a hobby where things look much worse before they look better, but things are starting to take shape. Switching my attention back to the leather and stiffener section, I decided to help the leather bend by thinning it down further using a groover. That tool is typically used to create the stitch and groove, but it was perfect for this job as well. I also decided to remove sections of the stiffener where the backside of the calculator strap and cradle will land. The goal was to remove bulk and leave the leather as flat and uniform as possible. The point of no return, attaching the liner, complete with strap and cradle, to the leather body of the case itself. I did this in steps, gluing down one panel at a time. I use a bone folder to make sure the lining goes into the folds and bunching is minimized, as well as to improve overall adhesion. With the non-functioning calculator in place, I'll let the glue dry. Trimming off the excess lining produces a good look at what the final product should look like. Those corners have to be rounded though. Luckily for me, I have the world's flimsiest corner punches. They work, but I think they're actually made of aluminum. The calculator itself has an opening near the flame, which allows air to mix with the butane. I decided to cut holes in the front and back of the case instead of blocking them up. I also cut out an opening for the screen. I actually debated this with myself, whether to actually do this. Ultimately, I figured that if the calculator can be used as a clock, the user should be able to see it at all times. I used very good adhesive, but in most leather goods, the strength of the bond comes from the stitch. I'm going to be using a saddle stitch technique to do so. Here I marked the stitch line. I used diamond chisels with 2.5mm spacing to punch through the leather and microsuede lining. With the stitch holes punched all around the edge, I can move on to the stitching itself. It's a simple process. All you need is thread, a couple of needles, thread snips, a weird way to protect your fingers, and something to burn the thread once done. Saddle stitching takes a while, so here is the briefest of looks at it. Rinse and repeat for about 130 stitches. The case is almost there. The edge needs finishing. I sanded the edges flush, beveled them, and finally applied some paint. But I'll leave the reveal for later, specifically after I finish the display box. I used MakerCase.com to design the box and cut it out of 1/4" plywood on the laser. I also engraved a small space on one side, but more on that later. As always, this was done at assembly, in my opinion the best makerspace in Austin, Texas. Titebond 3 is my wood glue of choice. If you're thinking that a laser cut box won't really look all that appropriate, you're right. The plan is to cover and line the box, so all I really needed was a solid structure. However, I also needed the surface to be smooth. That's why I filled in the gaps around the joints with a wood filler and sanded the box smooth. I cut the box open on the table saw. And here you can see where the engraved rectangle comes into play. It is meant to leave a space for the box hinge. I was then able to get started on the box covering. I'll include a link to the excellent tutorial by DAS Bookbinding, which I followed to the best of my ability. I used PVA glue and a black bookbinding paper for the covering material. Overall, it's a straightforward process, just alternating between cutting and gluing. If I can offer any advice here, it's to make sure your surfaces can actually adhere well. It sounds obvious, but I have covered another box where I used paper with a somewhat glossy backing. In that case, I ended up having to scuff up the backing with fine grit sandpaper just to give the glue something to grab onto. paper has a lovely linen-like texture, but I do wish I used something different. The texture, in this case, grabs onto every piece of dust and dirt it comes across. Good thing woodworking and leatherworking don't generate dust, right? That said, it does look good. I cut a slit in the covering at the hinge location. Inserted the hinge. And hammered the nails that hold it into place. I stuck with the black and gold theme and installed a catch on the front of the box. Now moving on to what's going to hold the calculator in place. I use a laser to cut a few 1/4 inch pieces of MDF that will form the inside of the box. I then use a combination of wood and CA glues to glue up the stack. Which I then sealed with a Mod Podge spray because the next step involves painting the notoriously thirsty MDF. That next step is flocking, and once again I'm using gold to contrast with the black of the case and box. Flocking involves covering the object with an adhesive, or simple paint in this case, and then covering that with microfibers using an applicator. If you ever handled a jewelry or watch box with a suede-like interior that perfectly conforms to the walls of the box, it was probably flocking. I'm using what looks like a dedicated tool, but it's just 2 cardboard tubes which slide across each other. That movement forces air out, depositing the fibers onto the object. A relatively small part of the fibers you deposit will actually stick to the paint. You can reclaim and reuse the rest. With the inside done, including a flat piece for the top of the box, it's time to see how things fit together. I removed and reinstalled the hinge and the latch to secure the inner structure to the box itself. The box needed Casio branding, and I had every intention of printing or embossing on the paper itself. Fortunately, all my tests were failures, including an attempt to melt the embossing powder using a laser. So instead, I sourced a Casio decal in the appropriate color off eBay. I then spent an absurd amount of time trying to position it just right, and probably screwed it up. I don't have Casio's own version of the case and box for the QL-10, as in the file photos shown here. The original box is definitely sleeker than mine, but it almost undersells the QL-10. And honestly, I think the original brown pouch does zero service to what is a very elegant device. So all in all, I'm happy with the outcome. Big thanks to my pocket friends Torek, Fade, and Animal for helping me get these amazing things from across the world. Hope you enjoyed the deeper look into a weird but misunderstood device. Thank you for watching.